quite so well that way. And we looked at that last year. But that's the law. The other type of writing that we covered is narrative story. Stories of people. These illustrate God's nature in the laws and in the lives of people. And again, I told you a minute ago, I don't like the term historical book because it's not there to tell history. God could have chosen any number of places to tell the history of. This is not just a study in ancient civilization, okay? God put this here for a reason, and he cherry-picked it, and he put it in the Bible for us to learn from. What are we supposed to learn from it? Well, we see through the lives of the people, through David, through Saul, through Israelite society as a whole, through all the other characters that are presented, we see how God's laws and his truths play out in real life. It's one thing for God to say, here's my law, thou shalt do this. And it's a very another thing to say, all right, in the messiness and the turmoil and the confusion of everyday life, what do these truths look like? How are they supposed to play out? How am I supposed to obey them when this happens? How did he fail that I shouldn't fail? How did he succeed that I should also try to copy and try to succeed? We see God's laws play out in society, in the lives of other people, so that we can say, aha, when I come across a situation even vaguely familiar to this, maybe I can keep this story in mind and it will help guide me, because life is messy and it's confusing, and we're impulsive people, and we forget, and we're easily confused by our surroundings and our situations. And so God provides a lot of narrative stories to help show how his laws play out in everyday life. Does that sound familiar to everybody? That would be like the book of Samuel and all that we went through, and a bunch of numbers and stuff like that. Those are the two types of writing that we covered so far. Now we're going to look at a very different kind of writing called wisdom literature. And here's, did I just click that or did that not go? Okay, anyway. Here's what we got. Wisdom literature. This is a different perspective again, and so I want to kind of introduce it to us so we're comfortable with it and know how to read it. Wisdom literature is a view of God from man's perspective, not so much a view of man from God's perspective. I want you to let that sink in for just a minute. In the law and in the stories is God coming down to people and saying, here's how you should behave. We kind of get God's view of people, looking down at the planet full of humans and looking at Israelite society and secular society and all the different nations and stuff. And God says, here's how I see you. Here's what you should be doing. Here's how you should be behaving. Here's what you shouldn't be doing and behaving. And here's what I'm going to do about it when you behave. And here's what I'm going to do about it when you don't behave. It's very much a God view of human existence. And then the stories do the same. God says, here's the story I'm going to tell, and here's how I'm going to respond to it. Here's what he should have done. Here's what he didn't do. Here's what he did do that he shouldn't have done, but here he behaved real well, and I'm going to bless him. It's really, it's written by human authors, but it's really very much God telling the story, saying, here's how I see things, and here's my response to them, and here's what you should learn from that. Wisdom literature is kind of the opposite. Wisdom literature looks at God from man's point of view. It's people writing saying, here's what I've seen, here's what I've observed, here's what I feel, and here's how I see God in this situation, and here's how his laws play out in my life as I look back and try to follow and worship him. So instead of a top-down view, it's a bottom-up view of the same thing. It's the same two parties, God and people. They're still looking at each other, but one is from the top view, but this is from the bottom view looking up, a lot more so. Everybody okay? If you're okay, go like this. If you're not okay, go like this. If you're too embarrassed, just go like this. That's fine too. Okay. So the wisdom literature, it relates the experiences of man to the truth and the character of God. Instead of God saying, here's my truth and character, relate yourself to it. This is man saying, here's my experience, how does it relate to what God says and who he is? There are 5 books of the Bible that we oftentimes include in this category of wisdom literature. They are Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. And so we're going to start this quarter, we'll probably take up most of this quarter, going through these 5 books. Usually, by the way, I would start off with the book of Job when we just go in order. There's not a whole lot of historical reference in these books. They're kind of, if you can say, more timeless. Not that the other books don't apply to us in our time, I'm not saying that, but there's not as much historical grounding in these. They're more philosophical in nature, and so you can kind of cover them in any order, and it doesn't really hurt anything. Usually I would just go, though, in order, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, but this time I'm going to not choose to do Job first. Why do you think that would be? Because, as Providence would have it, the guys just spent an entire quarter well, studying suffering, I'll say that. But much of it was in the book of Job. And I think the guys might be just a little bit Jobbed out. Okay? And so, as a gesture of understanding to all the gentlemen and or ladies who were in this class, I will not cover Job first. But I do still want to go through it for two reasons. One, all the ladies that were up in 400, I don't want to deprive them of the powerful nature of this book and by skipping it altogether. And two, what we did in the summer was actually a topical study, not a book study. What does that mean, and why do we care? A topical study does what? It goes into a book or passage of the Bible, and it looks for references that pertain to a specific topic, and it extracts them out and kind of condenses them into a study just about that topic. And that's fine to do. I'm not criticizing that at all whatsoever. Does any of you in here, are any of you in here fans of essential oils? Everybody's laughing. I'm not a big fan myself. My wife likes them, fine, whatever. But when you do essential oils, what they do is they take these plants or leaves or roots or fruits or whatever it is, and they put them in a big tank, and they steam them, or they mix them with alcohols or ethers, and they pull out the oil that is in there, and they condense it down into a little tiny bottle, which they sell for exorbitant amounts of money, and they try to tell you that it does good things, besides smell pretty. Okay? That's kind of what a topical study is. It goes in, it takes the entire book in its entirety, it extracts out little bits and pieces that talk about the topic I'm interested in, combines it all together in one little package and says, all right, now let's study this topic. That's fine to do. I have no problem with that. But if you do that, what are you not so much focusing on? The other 98% of the book, which you did not extract, right? Yeah, so oftentimes in doing a topical study, which again is fine, but it's easy to miss, again, the overall picture of the book and what the writer is really trying to focus on. And if I may spoil a little bit of the surprise, I'm going to really suggest, and by that I mean like blatantly obviously state, the book of Job is not primarily about suffering at all. I mean, suffering is certainly involved for sure, but that's not the central teaching or the main focus of the book. And that's what we're going to try to go after when we study, because we're going to do a book study as opposed to a topical study. But again, in deference to you guys who are tired of Job, we're not going to do it right away. We'll go through Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, then come back, pick up Job at the end, because maybe you'll be a little bit refreshed. Okay? Anyway, continuing on. These are the 5 books of wisdom literature. These were written mostly, not all, during the time of David and Solomon, which is why I'm putting them right in this placement that I am after the book of Samuel, because historically that's kind of where they were written, during the time of David and Solomon. So we're going to study these books at this point in our study. Again, not all of these were written all during the time of David and Solomon. I got that. Song of Solomon, pretty much written in the Song of Solomon, during the time of Solomon. Ecclesiastes, written by Solomon. Proverbs, many of them written by Solomon, although bits and pieces written by other people. Psalms, again, written by a whole lot of people, many of them David, but not all of them. And Job. We'll talk about when and by whom that was written later on. A couple other thoughts about wisdom literature. They tend to be philosophical in nature. I mentioned this already. More so than the other types of writing. A lot of thinking, a lot of musing about meaning, about relationship, a lot about feeling. It just deals with things that we don't see in the other books so often. These books often take a here's what I have seen approach to God's truth. Again, while the other books are God saying, here's my truth, abide by it, this takes human experience and says, all right, here's what I've experienced, and let me think about it, and here's how I relate this back to who God is and my relationship with Him. Again, it's a bottom side up type view of our relationship with God. And finally, it's about people relating their lives to God's truths instead of God instilling His truths on His people. That's just another way of saying what I've already said about 10 times now of people taking their experience and looking back at God. So, if you are excited and ready to begin the first piece of wisdom literature, which I'm sure you are at this point, then here we go. We're going to start out, again, not with Job. Thank you, you're welcome. But we're going to start with the book of Psalms. That's the next one in order. So, usually I'd say turn to Psalm chapter 1, but I'm not going to say that quite yet. The Psalms is God's personal songbook. In fact, let me see what I got here. Here we go. I have a songbook right here that somebody graciously provided for me in the podium because I forgot to get one out of the pews. And as I flip through the songbook, what types of things do I notice? How's it formatted? How's it written? Well, I see, as I turn to this page, page number 5, I see a number up in the corner. I see a title here, How Great Thou Art. I see a whole bunch of lyrics, basically a poem written here in between a whole bunch of little black dots and lines. We're not going to care so much about the black dots and lines today. We know that as music, but we're going to ignore that for right now. I also see a name up in the corner. That name up in the corner is what? Who wrote the poem? Yeah, who wrote the words, and in the other corner is who wrote the music. So all these different aspects I see, and as I turn to a different page, it's the same format. I see another title, another number, I see some more words, I see some more names, and I can flip through this whole book and see more of the same, okay? Now, if I were to say, all right, let's study this songbook this week and next week in our Sunday school, let's start out with a good summary. What's this songbook about? We'd kind of give me the look like a few of you I see are giving me right now, kind of a side look, kind of a blank look. You say, well, it's kind of hard to summarize, isn't it? Because we have 209 songs in here, all of them, well, written by many, 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 many different people, many of them about all different kinds of topics. So it's going to be kind of hard to nail down what a good summary is, or it's going to be hard to do an overview of a book that is just compiled of a whole bunch of different writings about a whole bunch of different things by a whole bunch of different people with a whole bunch of different messages. So you can kind of see my dilemma here in doing a survey book of the book of Psalms, isn't it? This is a really, really hard one for me to teach because you can't do an overview of a book that's so fragmented like that. It's written as a songbook. So I think what I'm going to do is we're going to talk more about Psalms and how it's written instead of so much going through all of the individual Psalms. Even if we covered 2 Psalms a week, we'd be doing this for 75 weeks or roughly 2 years, okay? That's not the kind of class this is. We're trying to make some time here and do a survey class. So we're going to talk about the Psalms, kind of give us more of a guide on how to read the Psalms than go through specific ones. And besides, I think Pastor Sean, at least during the summer on Wednesday nights, he was doing a great job of going through individual Psalms anyway. He can take care of that. He can take care of that. We're going to do an overview. But we will catch maybe 2 or 3 easy ones at the end just for practice on how to read these things. Okay? So I think we'll maybe take that approach, and then you can go home and read your own Psalms on your own and understand them just fine, and everything will be great. The author of the book of Psalms, who wrote the book of Psalms? Well, we got David, we got Solomon, Asaph, Heman, Ethan, Moses, the sons of Korah, and possibly others that aren't even named within the Psalms. All kinds of different writers. The readers, of course, would have been ancient Israel. The message, again, I cannot provide you an overall summary statement of what the book is about because it's impossible. There are too many different messages to summarize in one sentence. This is because of the very unique structure. Yes, the structure. Just like in our hymn book or our songbook, the book of Psalms is really a collection of independent songs. Each has its own style, its own message, and its own structure. But unlike most of what we've seen so far, Psalms is written in poetry. So in just a minute, we're going to look at Hebrew poetry for just a minute. The book of Psalms here really is God's own personal songbook. These are the songs that he provided through the human writers for the people to sing in the course of their worship. And they're written for different circumstances, they're written for different reasons. Some are very context specific. They suit themselves well to be sung at specific times. Others are not that way. There just seem to be general songs you can sing. All different types. But they are all poetry. And we haven't dealt a whole lot with poetry yet either in our scripture survey. And so we're going to talk a little bit for a while about how to read Hebrew poetry in our Bibles. Okay? If I were to give you a poem in English, how would you recognize it as poetry? Let's try this. Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow. And everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to... What was that? Go. Yeah. Now, obviously you know that poem, right? Why does the word go fit so well there? Because it rhymes. And by rhyme we mean this word sounds a lot like that word, right? And so in poems we have a lot of rhyming going on, usually at the end of a phrase. Mary had a little lamb, Thesis white as snow. Everywhere that Mary went, doesn't rhyme with lamb, but that's okay, because the next line, the lamb was sure to go. So lines 2 and 4, the last word, rhyme. And to our ears, that's really soothing and pleasing, and it makes a good poem. All right? Not all poems rhyme. I know if your English teachers are out there, you're screaming, not all poems are rhyming. Fine, okay, I got it. But for us normal people who are not English scholars, it sounds more like a poem of rhymes, okay? For us stupid people. Poems also have Mary had a little lamb, his fleece was white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, his lamb was sure to go. Now, I kind of bebopped back and forth for a reason, because poems also have what? Oh, yeah, rhyme, meter, cadence, whatever. It has a certain flow to it that's not arbitrary. Prose writing, or just normal speech like I'm speaking now, there's no rhythm. You can't bebop back and forth to what I'm saying normally. But if I quote a poem, and again, English people, please, plug your ears or something for a minute. Most poems that normal people enjoy will have a flow and a meter and a little sing-songy, rhythm to them as well. Okay, those are English poems. What do Hebrew poems do? How do they write their poetry? Is it the same way? Do they have rhyme? Do they have meter? Do they have all these kinds of things? Yes, they have meter as well, but when you translate the Hebrew into the English, a lot of that meter kind of goes away because the words are obviously not the same because they're in a different language and they're in different order and all that stuff, so it's really hard for us to pick up the meter. It doesn't show up well in English. They also have rhyming, but it's a little bit different too. Here, let's just do it this way. English poetry has some distinct characteristics like rhyme and meter. Hebrew poetry does too, but its characteristics are a bit different. Instead of rhyming with sound, they rhyme with meaning. At least that's what I've read, and teachers have explained it to me because I'm not a scholar like that, I'm not smart like that. But here's what they tell me. They say in Hebrew, they don't rhyme so much with sound, but they rhyme with meaning. And there's different ways they can write their verse. One of them we'll call synonymous or parallel, where instead of the second line sounding the same as the first, the second line means the same as the first. So instead of identical sounds, they have identical meanings. So let's practice with this one. I chose Psalm 25:4 just as an example. Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. So as we look at this verse, and we know that it's this type of verse, what is the rhyme in the verse as we look at that? So there's a couple. We can line up the different parts, and we'll do it this way as an explanation. The first phrase, make me to know your way, O Lord. Teach me your path. What else in this verse lines up with or means kind of the same thing as make me to know? Yeah, perfect. You guys are brilliant. Teach. Make me to know and teach, in the Hebrew mind, rhymes, right? Because they mean kind of the same thing. Now we could go into the Hebrew roots and word studies and in-depth linguistic stuff and all that kind of, and parcel out the differences between teach and know and the Hebrew grammatical stuff and all that. And that's fine. Again, I'm not criticizing that, and that's all well and good. But I think in this type of writing, the author isn't trying to emphasize the differences between the two. He's trying to emphasize what? The similarities between the two. So we're not going to try to differentiate them, because I don't think that's what the author's getting at. He's getting at what is the sameness between the two. So for our purposes, to make somebody to know something is the same as to teach them, okay? Make me to know your ways, okay? What else in this verse lines up with or rhymes with your ways? Your paths, right? Yeah, very good. See, you guys are brilliant. You're all scholars. You know this. Your ways and your paths, they're the same thing. They rhyme, okay? And again, we could split hairs and find the differences, fine, whatever. But in this poetry, they're emphasizing the sameness. And so he says the same thing, make me to know your ways, O Lord, and then he repeats himself, using different words, but saying the exact same thing, Teach me your paths. You'll find this kind of verse all over the place throughout the Psalms. Not every verse, not every verse, but a lot of them. Okay? Let's do one more practice one here and see if you guys can get it all by yourself. Chapter 2, verse 1. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? What's the first one? Let's start with the subject. What pieces line up here? Who's doing what that lines up? I think I heard people say the nations, and that lines up with the peoples. Yeah, in fact, most nations are made up of peoples. Yeah, it works out really well, doesn't it? The nations of the people, the same thing, that rhymes. And what's the other one? Rage and plot in vain. Yeah, if you're plotting against somebody, you're probably angry at them. You're trying to destroy them. You're trying to come up with a plan to sabotage them. In the midst of this, you also have inside of you a lot of rage. So they're really two sides of the same coin. They're the same thing. They go together and they rhyme. Okay? So when you're reading through the Psalms here and you see something like that and a verse seems to repeat itself or say the same thing, you say, oh, okay, I see what he's doing now. He's rhyming. He's writing good poetry. He's saying the same thing. And I can look at both phrases and, again, we could parcel them out. And there's differences between them, but one kind of clarifies the other, one kind of emphasizes the other. They go together. They mean the same thing. They're trying to convey the same message, and they rhyme. Okay? 9:44. I forgot how quick that clock goes. We're going to continue more with Hebrew poetry next week, and we're also going to do some examples and read through some actual psalms and put some of this stuff into practice and see how they apply. But for now, we're going to have to call it quits, and we'll pick it up here next week and continue in the book of Psalms. Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for giving us your word. We didn't cover a whole lot of it specifically this morning, but just looking at the amazing piece of literature here that you gave us. It is literature. It's inspired. It's unlike any other book on the planet, and yet you still put it in beautiful form. You use all different kinds of writings as a means of communicating your message to us. Help us to really, really honestly and objectively and studiously look at what you have for us through your word here as we continue to study it this quarter. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. All right, thank you very much. You are dismissed.